Are you having a good day? I should probably just go then, actually. I'll be here then to talk about how you can have a better day on those days that are a bit less world domination-y, let's say. And yeah, they lie ahead in your future somewhere. And I guess I should actually start by admitting to you all that not all of my days in the past have been good ones. Now, I really should be escorted from the stage, obviously. In fact, as I stand in front of you, lovely people, I'm reminded of a day early in my career as a young management consultant. And I was being given the chance to stand up and give a final presentation on a big project. And it was my first chance to do this. Normally, it would have been my boss doing it. He thought it was a good opportunity for me to shine. So I was excited about the opportunity. I was, if I'm honest, also a little bit nervous. So I was thinking about how to project gravitas and presence into the room, which I decided to do mostly by striding about as boldly as I could. It was working, in my mind at least. I was owning the room. But what happened next I hadn't planned for, which was as I took an especially bold step into the middle of the room, I heard a crack. And it turns out, some of you may know what was happening. I did not know what was happening until it happened. It turns out it is entirely possible for the heel on a well-worn, high-heeled shoe to break off completely. This is what I learned in that moment. As I was lying on the floor, it turned out to be rather difficult to project any further gravitas or presence into the room. So there are things that we can't control in our days, of course. There are wardrobe malfunctions, perhaps more often technology malfunctions, perhaps even more often than that, people malfunctions. And so, of course, we deal with these things every day. But I've long been drawn to a philosophy that I've called realistic optimism, which I think is very much in the spirit of what we're here today to talk about. Realism, because yes, as human beings, we do face constraints. We face a lot of them. You know, everything isn't always awesome, even though I do really love that Lego movie. Woo! Everything is awesome. So, we do face constraints as human beings. We're not perfect. The world isn't perfect. But the more that we can understand the constraints and acknowledgement, we actually have a better chance of finding a way through and around them. And my toolkit for that has always been behavioral science, because it's interesting. And the research that comes out of neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics has shown us that with just a little bit of understanding of what it takes for our brains to work at their best, and a bit of understanding of why we behave and think and feel the way we do, a lot of things that seem imposed on us, a lot of things that we think we have to roll with, actually, it turns out we have more influence over than we think. And I'm going to give you three little examples of how the science points towards tiny tweaks that we can make in our everyday routines that really take just seconds, but that can have quite big effects on the way that every day feels. I'm going to do something existential first. I'm going to talk about how you can shift reality. No small thing. I'm going to talk about something deeply practical, how we get more time in the day. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about something social. Now, how can we remote control other people's moods, like I'm remote controlling these slides? Does that sound useful? Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, let's get going. Let's start with editing our reality. What is there that we can do to shift the way that we experience reality, to see more dogs in hats with sunglasses, for example? Wouldn't that be nice? There was another day in my career where I was not seeing enough dogs in hats with sunglasses. I'd been assigned to a project I was not excited about. Don't know if any of you have any pieces of work on your plate that you're not excited about. It was that one. And it was the first day that I was supposed to be meeting clients on this new project. And I was working alongside a guy who was very excited about the project, unlike me. And this first meeting was going to be our chance to bond with the clients. And I was grumpy for several reasons. I was grumpy because I didn't really want to be on the project. I was grumpy because it was actually a video conference, and I had quite a strong belief that we should have gone to meet the clients in person. Yes, it would have been a hassle to get on a plane, but it would have been different, it would have been more powerful, so I was a bit annoyed about that. And then my colleague, my enthusiastic colleague, had his 200-page PowerPoint deck, which he was going to present. I don't know if you have anyone like that in your life. So this man, we'll call him Lucas, this was the man in my life with the 200-page slide deck. And so we went into the meeting. I knew it was going to be a bad meeting. It was a bad meeting. In fact, I mean, it was really not great. There were people looking frowny, there were people talking over each other, misunderstandings. It just felt really sticky, you know the sort of interaction I mean. So I thought afterwards I should do the good thing, the right thing, and I should sit down with my colleague Lucas and say, I think we've got a problem. We've started on the wrong foot with the clients. So I did the good citizen thing and talked to him about my concerns. He sat there, sort of gradually crossing his arms and starting to shake his head at me. It turned out that all the things that I was talking about were not part of his experience of the meeting. He reminded me that there were several points where the clients had actually said, "This is a great meeting, I'm really happy," or words to that effect. He reminded me that there were points where people had laughed. And it wasn't that I didn't believe him, it was just on the edge of my consciousness enough that I thought, he's not making this up. But I was fascinated by the fact that we'd had such a different experience of those couple of hours. I mean, it wasn't just that we had different personalities, though that might have been true. It was the fact that we really saw and heard different things. And this got me very interested in a phenomenon that is called selective attention. And the way it works is this. It turns out that the conscious part of our brain can only process a certain portion of the information that's out there at any given time. It's got capacity constraints, if you like. And if you think about all of the data that's around us at any given time, there are billions of pieces of data around us at any given time. In fact, if you just turned to the person next to you and started to look really closely at the hairs on their head, first of all, it would creep them out, so don't do that. But also, your brain would crash like an overloaded computer with too many incoming inputs. So, very elegant solution. Very elegant solution. Our brain subconsciously filters out whatever doesn't seem important, so that we're not even aware of seeing or hearing it. This is the phenomenon that scientists call selective attention. Now, here's what's interesting for us. It turns out that there is a rule on what gets filtered in and what gets filtered out by our brains. It's kind of useful to know what that rule is, because whatever gets filtered in is effectively our experience of reality. It's what we're conscious of, it's what we see and hear and we think is really happening. The rest of it is sort of irrelevant because we're not aware of it. So what is the rule? And turns out the rule is this. Our brain directs that small stock of conscious attention to whatever resonates with what's already top of mind for us. Now, what that means is, whatever our aims are, our attitudes are, or our assumptions are, our brain will scan whatever's around us and look for things that match what's already top of mind for us. Now, let me give you an example. It's actually one of my favorite studies because it's so true to life. There was a bunch of radiologists. Do you know what radiologists are? Right, so they look at scans of your body to see what's wrong. And this group of radiologists was at Harvard, and they had a stack. I realize that looks like Lucas's 200-page PowerPoint deck. No, they did not have that. They had a stack of lung scans, and in the last of the lung scans, there was printed a gorilla, hence the gorilla. It's not that random. How many of the radiologists saw the gorilla? You're in the right ballpark. 83% of the radiologists did not see the gorilla, despite the fact that eye-tracking devices showed they looked directly at it, despite the fact that the gorilla was 48 times the size of the average lung nodule, And these are folks who are trained to spot abnormalities. Why didn't they see it? Because gorillas were not top of mind for them, right? And it's not just specific objects that we're able to filter out. It's more, it's judgments as well. It's perceptions in a broader sense. So imagine that I'm a researcher. This is a real study. And I give you all a test. And I put this half of the room in a bad mood by randomly telling you that you failed the test. I know it sounds a bit silly, but it would be enough if you think of yourself in a lab taking a test and then being told you didn't score very highly. It would be enough to just dampen your mood just a little bit, right? And then I, the researcher, give you all a description of an individual to read and decide how likable they are. You guys, because you're not in a good mood, decide that this person is not very nice. So this is really profound. It means that the way that we go into a situation, our starting point, really drives the way that we seem to experience the world. It's as if we are all living our own choose-your-own-adventure, where everything we do leads to something different in the path forward. We're all experiencing, effectively, an entirely subjective, incomplete version of reality, so we might as well make it something that we want it to be. And this is where the science becomes very interesting, because it actually doesn't take very much to be more intentional about your starting point as you go into any conversation, any task, any situation. You really just need to ask yourself a few questions to put whatever you want to have top of mind to be truly top of your mind. You essentially reset your brain's perceptual filters by asking yourself a question like, what really matters to me here? What's my real aim? You might check in with your attitude and your assumptions, knowing that that's going to shape what you perceive. If your attitude and assumptions are negative, as mine were when I was going into this meeting, remember, they're going to shape what you perceive. If you come along like someone like Lucas and say, well, actually, I'm looking forward to this meeting. I think it's a great opportunity for collaboration. I'm going to look for every moment where there's a chance for us to build a solid foundation for the project. Magically, you see more of that. And you can even ask yourself very, very directly and say, okay, well, what do I want to put my attention towards? What do I actually want to notice? You know, when I was lying on the floor with my shoe in two pieces, I had a choice. I was lying there feeling mortified, embarrassed, of course. If I'd let that stay top of mind, what would I have seen? I would have seen every sign that they thought I was a complete idiot. But I had a point of choice at that moment to say, okay, well, what do I want my attitude to be? Because it's going to affect how I perceive the rest of the meeting. I decided I wanted to laugh at myself. I thought, well, I might as well, because they're going to be laughing. And then, what do I go on to perceive? I perceive that they are laughing with me rather than laughing at me. So even when something's gone wrong, you have the chance to hit reset. Let me give you also an example of how you can use this when you're just feeling a bit low or worn down. Suppose you're feeling a bit low or worn down. Not now, obviously. You can ask yourself, okay, notice one good thing in the next few minutes. You put that top of mind. And then because of the way that your brain's selective attention works, you're more likely to notice other good things, and it becomes a virtuous circle. It's like the opposite of getting out of bed on the wrong side. So let me give you a chance to just practice this. Turn to the person next to you. Tell them one thing that you've enjoyed today, so far. Take just 10, 15 seconds about it, and you'll be resetting your filters. Go. Okay, wave your hands in the air if you feel like you're in a good mood. Woo, woo. So you might not want to do the wave your hands in the air bit when you're commuting, but you can do all the other bits of it. Okay, let's talk about how we can get more time in the day. Who would like more time in the day? We've done the existential bit. Now let's talk about something super, super, super practical. Okay. How do we get more time in the day? I'm actually going to ask you to demonstrate this, because this isn't hard to demonstrate. I'm going to ask, and you don't have to do anything that takes you out of your seat. I'm going to ask you to do something really simple. You're going to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G as fast as you can, out loud, on my mark, with a bit of energy, panache even. A, B, C, D, F, G, like that. Do you all know what I'm asking you to do? Okay. Yes. Fantastic. Okay. It's always a good start. You've got to check. Okay. Ready? Go. Oh my gosh, Chris, you really do have a cult here. This is... That is the tightest delivery of ABCDFG I've ever heard. Oh, yes. Okay, let's see whether you can replicate that. I want you to do the same with numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Are you ready? Go. Shocking. All right. Now I'd like you to do something which will take the same amount of time as those two put together. I'm going to ask you to mix them up. So say A1, B2, C3, like that. What? Are you ready? Go. Well done. Okay, so let me just debrief what just happened for a second. Were you faster doing them separately or mixed up? Did you make more mistakes doing them separately or mixed up? There you go. 20 years of research into multitasking, just done here. Who needs a lab? Yes, it turns out that multitasking unambiguously slows us down. When you're trying to do more than one thing at once, we become slower. Unless one of those things is totally automatic, if they both require conscious attention, you're going to slow yourself right down. And you're going to make between 2 and 4 times as many mistakes, which is going to slow you down even more. And we didn't demonstrate this here, but you also will be harder pressed to make wise decisions and to be creative if you're trying to do multiple things at once. So, multitasking. Not so great. But why is it that we can't multitask? Why is it that we're actually struggling with multitasking? And it turns out that just as our conscious brains have capacity constraints and can only process a certain amount of information at one time, it's also the case that our conscious brains can only do one thing at a time. So when we think we're multitasking, we're so fond of saying, oh yeah, I'm multitasking. And actually what we're doing is we're asking our brain to switch from one task to another. Letters to numbers, to letters to numbers, or email to writing something, to email to reading something, to email to trying to have a conversation. And so in each of those switches, even though they're so small that we kind of almost don't even notice them, they take some time and they take some mental energy. And that's what adds up to the enormous hit to our productivity that multitasking presents us. So we're definitely struggling with this every day, with our always-on lives, with messages coming at us all the time. I mean, how many of us are trying to juggle messages all the time? Yeah, there's one person there. I don't believe that the rest of you are not. So we are faster and smarter when we single task, but how do we actually do more of that? I mean, you may be familiar with this advice. I've been thinking about this for such a long time, working so hard on this. What I would say, I'll share with you some of the things that I've used that have worked quite well. I definitely am very jiggy with the airplane mode on my phone. I flip that on several times a day and close down my browser to give myself that ability to single task, to do one thing at a time. But in reality, of course, you can't do that a lot. You want to stay in the flow. So I tend to try and pick the most important task that I have on my plate, the one that I really need to be on my game for. And I try and focus on single tasking around that. And I think that's one of those examples of being realistic. So that works well for me. The other thing that really helps is actually batching similar tasks together. Some of you might do this already. If you look at your to-do list in the morning and you notice that you've got some calls, and you've got some thinking stuff to do, and you've got some reading perhaps to do, and some whatever else you do in your wonderful lives, the more that you can do those things together in one batch, the less you're asking your brain to switch from one mode to another. So that also makes you faster, especially email. That's the big win, right? If you can blitz your email 2 or 3 times a day rather than 2 or 3 times a second, that really, or maybe 2 or 3 times a minute, let's be realistic, that is going to be a huge win for you. You will get through your email more quickly. And the other thing I would say is I'd encourage you to start small and be kind to yourself. When I quit my job to write my book, I was on my own a lot for the first time in quite a long time. Just hours and hours and hours on my own in front of the computer with this book to write. And it became much easier for me to see exactly where my mind was at. My mind was not at single tasking, I have to tell you. So there I was. You know, I would switch off airplane, I'd put my phone on airplane mode, and then I'd see my hand just crawling towards the mouse to open up the browser, as if it wasn't connected to me. It was very strange. So I decided I had to be kind to myself. I was twitching after 10 minutes. Okay. Then I got a timer and put a timer on my desk and set it for 10 minutes. I let it count down to 0. Then I felt great when it hit 0. Beep, 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 beep. Very nice. And the thing that's useful to know about that is that whenever you're trying to change a personal habit, you want to set up the neurochemistry of reward, because your brain likes to repeat things that it finds rewarding. So if you set up a situation where you think that you want to concentrate for 90 minutes, as I did when I was first working on the book, and then you fail, and then you feel awful, and then you think, oh, well, I can't do that. I won't do that again then. That's kind of what's going on in your brain. And so it helps to pick a small goal, achieve it, feel great, and then your brain is more motivated to try and go further. So be kind to yourself, start small. Think about your most important task next week and how you could get more good quality, creative thinking time around it by single tasking. Okay, now, you might be saying, yeah, but I'm now setting my intentions. I've got lots more time to play with because I'm single tasking. But what about those other people? Those pesky other people, because of course it really does affect us if we think about whether we're having a good or bad day. So much of it is dependent on other people around us. It only has to be one person who walks into a room in a terrible mood and sort of toxic cloud sort of spreads, doesn't it? And it turns out that it's not just your imagination. We are astonishingly contagious as human beings. Our emotions bleed and leak. Even if you're not working on the same thing as someone else, even if you're not talking to them, it's been shown that our emotions tend to sync up within 5 minutes. Some studies show even faster. It helps to know this. It helps to know this. There was a day in Paris when I was coaching 4 attorneys. And it was a wonderful meeting. The lovely setup, really. The way it was working was that I was their coach, but then they were also coaching each other, helping each other on topics and issues that they were working on together. So it was a lovely, warm, supportive, mutually supportive vibe. And then it turned out, actually, I say 4 lawyers. One of them wasn't there. She was running late, but I knew she was running late, so that was fine. But she came in to the room like this. I need a bit of a run-up. Don't worry, people down there, I'm not actually... So she came in like this. Threw herself into a chair. Making noises like this. Like a horse. Sometimes I can't do it, and I just stand there going, But no, that's how it sounded. And the stress was just rippling off her. So I watched, amazed. I mean, I knew the research, but it's still interesting to see it happen sometimes. I watched as this previously incredibly happy, warm, friendly session started to fall apart. She got her phone out and said, "When's the next session? Oh, so annoying. I can't make that." And then I watched in amazement as the other three all started to fill their phones out and say, "Yeah, oh, I can't make it either." It sort of sounds like that. And this was amazing because at the beginning of the session, we'd all talked about the date, and I knew that they could make it. So I had a point of choice at this moment. I could see what was happening. I could see that her emotions were bleeding over into the room. But I knew that if she was having an effect on the room, so could I, right? My emotions are contagious too. But she was definitely the strongest feeling person in the room, so I needed to think about what I could quickly project into the room, sort of almost back at her. And you have to think about, well, what is the strong emotion, positive emotion you want to put back into the room? I knew that if I projected irritation and concern into the room, that was not going to help. But I thought, okay, had a split second to think. I know, it was Paris, remember, in my defense, it was Valentine's Day. So I thought, okay, I'll project love at them. I did not obviously say out loud, "I'm now about to project love at you, suckers." This was all in my head, very quietly. I was saying to myself, okay, how can I project love? What can I do to project something more positive? And I was thinking, what have I really loved about working with them? I thought about my lovely husband. I imagined his face for a split second. All I can say is that it started to settle. It started to settle. I sat there with a smile on my face, and it settled. Now, you might say, yeah, but maybe it would have settled anyway. But imagine that I hadn't done that, and I had projected my irritation and concern into the room. That would have simply escalated the situation. So I had some control. The other thing that you might say to me is, yeah, but how can you just put yourself in a loving mood? I mean, that's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Well, there's actually quite a lot of research out there on the power of visualization. But it helped to know something else, which is something called the fundamental attribution error. This helped me in this moment. This is one of the most profound findings in psychology. And it goes like this. Let me turn it around the other way. If I show up at work and I'm cranky and slow, I know that it's because I didn't sleep well last night. If you turn up and you're cranky and slow, with apologies to whoever I'm pointing at, I'm sure isn't, I'll go over there. If you turn up and you're cranky and slow, I think that you are a horrible person and very inefficient. In other words, when we see bad behavior in ourselves, we know that it's down to bad circumstances. When we see bad behavior in other people, we tend to attribute it to bad character. And that is the attribution error, because it turns out, good news everyone, only 1% of the population is a psychopath. Yes, we can applaud that. Which immediately makes you look around and think, okay, who is it? Probably not here. I think you're underrepresented, psychopaths. So, it helps to know this. Because it allows you to think differently about the behavior that's in front of you. The other thing that's helpful to know is to know that most bad behavior is caused not just by bad circumstances, but by a neurochemical reaction to those bad circumstances. It turns out that when you put someone under even mild stress in a brain scanner, you see less activity in their prefrontal cortex. And prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for sophisticated reasoning, self-control, forward planning. So in other words, when people are under stress, for some reason, and it doesn't have to be much. It can be really just as little as feeling that your self-worth is a bit challenged or your social standing is a bit challenged. what happens is that there's less activity in the smart part of your brain. In other words, when you're under stress, you become dumber, and not very nice. So this really helps because it means that when you see bad behavior in other people, we'll get to him in a second. When you see bad behavior in other people, you can remind yourself that it's probably a good person in bad circumstances. Get curious and say, okay, what is it that has put their brain on the defensive to create this effect of reducing activity in the more sophisticated part of their brain right now? And the cat is there, the lovely kitten, because my go-to story, you don't have to believe the story that you come up with that explains their bad behavior. My go-to story is that their cat vomited on them this morning. So this cat, my husband once told me that, he said, you've got to point out this cat is not dead, it's resting, for all the Monty Python fans in there. Thank you. I am from the UK, you know. So it doesn't matter what the story is. You just have to come up with something that makes you consider the possibility that something is creating the bad behavior you're seeing. And if you can do that, then what you change is your own demeanor. Of course, I mean, you can have a bit of fun with the story, but you also change your demeanor. And given that our emotions are contagious, what that means is that's changing the space between you and the other person. And if they are feeling stressed, then what you're helping them do is lower that stress by projecting something more positive at them, even if you're not totally sure that they're not a jerk. So, what have we talked about? We've talked about the fact that even if your shoe is malfunctioned, and your meeting is dull, and the people around you are difficult, and the workload is heavy, it turns out that it is possible to imagine a world where being deliberate about your intentions for where you want to put your attention, in other words, just being more mindful of what's top of mind for you when you go into any situation, can make your reality, 10% better. You could steal back 10% more time in your day to think and to create by doing more single tasking. You can make people around you who are behaving a bit in a challenging manner, you could help them behave 10% more nicely by assuming good person, bad circumstances. And that starts to add up to a chance of having many, many more good days, and the chance to make even our good days better. And our own Chris Gilbo once said that better days lead to better lives. And that's a fine foundation for world domination. Thank you.